How do you feel when something goes way below the plan, or when someone says something stupid? Angry, right? Catharsis theory suggests you should vent that anger, but it's a bit more complex than that. You can't just vent anger, nor can you swallow it down. So, what should you do? Let me explain the psychology behind it. Chapter 1. Anger is strength. You're watching an action movie, and the hero erupts in fury. This moment is celebrated as one of strength, a pivot that changes the tide. It feels primal, almost natural, to think of anger as a tool, a force that can push away fear and make us invincible. But is that the whole truth, or just a cultural myth that convinces us anger is a weapon? Anger, when it strikes, makes the heartbeat race and tightens every muscle. It's like a storm rising within us, feeding the belief that we must act now or suffer the pressure. The ancient Greeks saw anger as a kind of madness. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, famously called it a brief lunacy, warning that it clouds reason and drives us to actions that leave regret in their wake. He argued that true strength isn't found in indulging anger, but in mastering it. In modern times, this notion hasn't changed as much as you might think. We still celebrate expressions of anger as if they were acts of bravery. Social media amplifies this, showcasing anger as a badge of righteousness. Shouting our discontent becomes a spectacle, reinforcing the false idea that venting helps. But is this rush, this catharsis, truly releasing anything? Or is it planting seeds for more anger to sprout later? Psychological research has delved deep into this illusion. The concept of venting anger to feel better, known as the catharsis theory, has been around for ages. Its roots are found in the works of Freud, who believed expressing repressed emotions prevented them from festering into larger issues. It sounds plausible, even logical, doesn't it? Yet, studies repeatedly show the opposite. Venting can feel satisfying in the moment, but instead of purging our anger, it strengthens the neural pathways associated with it. What we practice, we reinforce. Thus, venting isn't releasing, it's rehearsing. There's a subtle irony here. What feels like freedom is actually entrapment. Anger doesn't dissipate through expression alone. It feeds itself, like a fire that finds new fuel with each breath. Anger thrives when indulged. And so, we must ask ourselves, is it truly strength if it leaves us weaker afterward? The wisdom of the Stoics whispers the answer. Restraint, not outburst, reveals our real power. Chapter 2. The cultural celebration of anger. Take a moment to think about the way society frames anger. Movies, TV shows, and even the stories we hear growing up often present anger as an expression of strength and authenticity. Heroes shout, smash, and take action, always with a spark of rage that pushes them to victory. It's as if our collective narrative says, only when you're angry do you show you truly care. But does this perspective serve us, or does it blind us to the consequences? This glorification of anger isn't just limited to the big screen. In everyday life, we see examples of how being angry is linked with being strong, assertive, and decisive. We may applaud leaders who voice their frustration as if anger lends them more credibility. It's seen as a badge of passion, an emblem of justice or resilience. But here lies the danger. When anger is celebrated, it becomes habitual, and habits shape who we are. Philosophically, this isn't a new idea. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, advised against being led by anger, warning that what starts as an emotional spike can end in regretful chaos. He believed true strength lies in choosing reason over rage, peace over impulse. While anger might be a natural response, it doesn't mean it's the best one. Let's look at what psychology says. The repeated indulgence in anger can create a feedback loop where we start to use it as our go-to response. Neuroplasticity, A process where the brain rewires itself through repeated actions means that the more we express anger, the easier it becomes to fall into it again. In the long run, we might become more prone to anger, seeing it as our normal mode of operation. This can erode not just relationships, but our own mental well-being. So why does society push this narrative that anger is power? One reason could be that anger feels transformative. It feels like momentum. Yet, the science behind this shows it's often more of a trap than a tool. What starts as a show of power can gradually become a shackle, where we mistake our outbursts for strength, not realizing they deplete our capacity for true growth and change. In essence, the idea that venting anger proves strength is like drinking seawater when thirsty. It might seem like it's helping in the moment, but it only deepens the thirst. True empowerment doesn't come from letting anger take the reins. It comes from learning to steady the hand that holds them. Chapter 3. The Illusion of Catharsis. Did you ever get that great feeling after screaming your head off or cursing to let out steam? It feels like relief, like you've thrown up something black and nasty from your lungs. This is where what is referred to as catharsis comes in. The idea that anger needs to be ventilated in order to be eradicated from the system. Though, I think that it has its roots in the work of Sigmund Freud and ancient Greek mythology. But how far is this idea really effective? According to the catharsis theory, then, it is as if people harbor anger and store it in a closed kettle, which, after some time, becomes too much for the kettle to bear, and the only thing to do is to let it out, or else it will burst. This concept is logical and rather convincing. At the same time, it is rather misleading. The work presented here has been conducted over decades and refutes this metaphor. Anger reduction behavior research works done since the year 1950 have shown that expressing anger does not help in reducing it. Rather, it tends to escalate it, and often, in doing so, we funnel the very combustion that spreads the fire in the opposite direction. One of the most notable experiments to come out of Brad Bushman's laboratory showed that when people vent their anger through instrumental aggression, by whacking a punching bag and thinking of someone that made them angry, they ended up feeling more aggressive than before. Why? This is because once the angry behavior has been enacted in an aggressive manner, the brain is easily pulled back into that state again. The release we get is not the real release. It is the temporary one that makes things worse later on. From a philosophical perspective, the Stoics had their doubts long before modern science. Seneca, who considered anger a brief lunacy, believed that indulging in rage only validated it, making it harder to govern with reason. Anger isn't an energy that needs venting. It's a spark that needs understanding. Why do we cling so tightly to the catharsis myth, then? Perhaps because it feels like doing something, and doing something feels better than restraint. Yet restraint doesn't mean suppression. It means choosing how to respond. Just as you wouldn't put out a fire by fanning the flames, you can't cool anger by expressing it aggressively. True catharsis lies in rewiring how we think about anger itself, learning not just to feel it, but to transform it into something constructive. This is where practices like mindfulness and relaxation come into play. They don't just distract from anger, they retrain the brain. Instead of being the boiling kettle, imagine becoming the clear, calm water, able to reflect and respond without boiling over. That's not repression, it's mastery. Chapter 4. Chain reaction of anger. Do you get bad feelings in your chest and tighten your fists when you become angry? Anger is not a frame of mind or simply a feeling inside a person. Anger involves the whole body. The moment that something provokes anger, there will be a set of physiological changes that take place in the body. But why does it happen? And what are its implications on managing this one emotion? Well, during the anger instance, your upper old brain region known as amygdala starts to work itself up. It triggers hypothalamus, which works like control room and sends signals to increase the stress hormone, like adrenaline, cortisol. Your breathing rate increases, your blood pressure rises, and your muscles tense because the body is ready to burst into action. This is the fight or flight response, a holdover from our ancient ancestors created to address present physical dangers. However, the modern threats are not such bright tigers, but rather our terrible bosses, traffic congestions, or an argument with a close one. What we do not realize is that our bodies cannot tell the difference between an argument and a fight for our lives. The response is the same, a deluge of stress hormones that make us alert all the time. And this is where problems start. Holding on to anger, or frequently triggering this stress response, takes a toll on our bodies. Studies have shown that chronic anger is linked to health issues like heart disease, weakened immune function, and increased levels of inflammation. This isn't surprising when you think about what repeated doses of stress hormones do. They strain the heart, increase blood pressure, and can make the body more vulnerable to illness over time. So, what happens when we choose to vent anger? Well, thinking it will make us feel better. The truth is that expressing anger can keep the stress response active, prolonging the harmful physiological effects. Instead of finding relief, we stay in a heightened state, which is why people often report feeling more agitated after venting than before. Philosophically, this aligns with the Stoic principle that anger chains us to an illusion of power, while actually making us slaves to our own impulses. Epictetus taught that true strength comes not from acting on our rage, but from understanding it and reclaiming control over it. The real battle isn't outside us, it's within. Recognizing the physiological roots of anger helps us see that we need strategies that calm the system, not engage it further. Mindfulness, deep breathing, and physical activities that promote relaxation help break the cycle. Instead of letting anger dictate your response, imagine the power in pausing, allowing your body to shift out of that fight mode and reclaiming the reins of reason. It's a reminder that while anger may storm through your body like a wildfire, it's up to you to decide if you'll feed it or let it burn out. Chapter 5. The Illusion of Control. Why do we use anger most of the time when things don't work out the way we wanted them to? Anger, at the basic level, provides a feeling of strength, a quantifiable, albeit temporary sensation of holding the reins in a particular occurrence. We yell at our partner, shut doors, argue, and think that this will surely change the other's mind. But what if this reliance on anger as a tool of control reflects as much a constructed fantasy as it does a dominant social fact? Broadly defined, anger is a baseline reaction resulting from the belief that expectations, boundaries, or values have been crossed. The response is immediate and instinctive, which makes us want to be powerful and right. However, it seems we are in control most of the time. Anger is said to impair our ability to think and reason. Anger primes us physiologically to be more alert and cognitively to see the world in black and white terms, as a you versus me situation. In a study conducted in 2001, Carol Tavries, a psychologist, pointed out that while anger may be voiced severally in order to address a certain issue, the result is only the escalation of the level of anger and consequent escalation of conflict. We might yell, scream, and make demands to feel dominant, but it then becomes a behavior that is toxic. From a Stoic perspective, anger is not an agent of control, but a sign that we've lost it. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher, noted that the nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength. He believed that true power lies not in outward expressions of force, but in inner composure and the ability to respond to life's events without being swayed by emotional turbulence. When we use anger to exert control, we are not exercising mastery over our environment. We're showing that we're at the mercy of it. The false sense of control provided by anger can even mask deeper issues: fear, insecurity, or an aversion to vulnerability. Anger becomes a protective shield that makes us feel less helpless. But it doesn't solve the underlying discomfort. It only shifts focus from resolving issues to managing outbursts. Over time, the reliance on anger backfires, making us less capable of genuine influence or effective problem-solving. Instead of seeing anger as a tool for control, what if we approached it as an indicator that it's time to step back? When anger arises, it signals that something is at odds with our desires or values. Pausing before acting on that signal, taking deep breaths, counting to 10, or practicing mindfulness allows us to assess whether the situation requires action, empathy, or acceptance. Releasing the illusion that anger equates to control isn't easy. It challenges the narrative we've been fed by media, culture, and even our instincts. But as we learn to redirect this energy into measured responses, we gain true control, not over others, but over ourselves. And this kind of mastery is far more powerful than any fleeting moment of rage. Chapter 6. The Cost of Anger. Anger comes with a price, and often it's higher than we anticipate. While an outburst may feel justified and even momentarily satisfying, the aftermath can be riddled with consequences that extend beyond what we initially see. Let's take a deeper look into what anger costs us, both externally and internally. First, consider the social repercussions. Anger can erode trust and damage relationships. Imagine a scenario where a heated argument leads to harsh words exchanged with a close friend or loved one. Even after apologies are made, the sting of those words may linger, weakening the fabric of the relationship. Studies show that anger-driven confrontations create lasting memories, not just for those who express it, but also for those who are on the receiving end. A 2005 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology noted that people often recall moments of intense anger more vividly than happy or neutral memories. These moments stick with us, shaping how we view each other and, ultimately, how we interact in the future. Internally, the cost of anger extends to our physical and mental health. Chronic anger has been linked to an increased risk of health issues like heart disease, high blood pressure, and weakened immune function. The body's fight or flight response, which surges during angry episodes, triggers the release of stress hormones like cortisol. While beneficial in short bursts for immediate danger, prolonged exposure to these hormones wreaks havoc on the body. The American Psychological Association notes that this type of continuous stress can accelerate aging and contribute to chronic illnesses. On the mental front, anger can spiral into guilt and regret, especially when we realize that our actions caused unintended harm. The philosopher Seneca viewed anger as a self-sabotaging force, describing it as a temporary madness. His point wasn't just poetic, it was practical. When anger takes control, we often act in ways that contradict our better judgment, leading to behavior that invites remorse. Regret compounds stress, creating a cycle that's hard to break. Anger leads to regret, which leads to frustration, which can trigger more anger. Thirdly, there is the problem of what many people will refer to as a loss of perspective. Anger also puts blinkers on us, thereby preventing the possibility of seeing empathy or other options. It is true that in a defended mode, we only focus on winning an argument and defending oneself without paying attention to details. This, however, has the effect of creating a tunnel vision that can lead to poor decisions or failure to grab opportunities of growth or even reconcile. Stoic thinkers like Epictetus reminded us that anger is the antithesis of wisdom, a reactive state that feeds off the lack of our capacity to step back and think. But why does anger have such high price? Yet one explanation can be sought out in how our brain functions and interprets the emotions provoked. Anger is an automatic emotional response that is generated by the amygdala. Rationality is managed by the prefrontal cortex, and this part of the brain can easily be overshadowed by the emotional part of the brain. This makes the actions we take to be arbitrary in most cases, and this is not good news for those involved. Managing the hidden costs of anger means going beyond simple anger management to the point where one can recognize the conditions that make him or her angry and wait before responding to that feeling. That is why methods such as cognitive restructuring can come in handy. We start challenging ourselves rather than perceiving an event as a direct threat to our interests and self-esteem. This reflective space can transform rage into revelation and let us engage instead of acting out. The true challenge is not in avoiding anger altogether. That would be unrealistic, but in recognizing its potential cost and choosing to act with awareness. In doing so, we protect our health, preserve our relationships, and maintain a clear mind, ensuring that we do not pay more than we need to for a fleeting moment of fiery satisfaction. Chapter 7. From Fire to Fuel. What if, instead of just interpreting anger as something negative which leads to negative, we can transform it into something positive? Anger is seen more often as a fire that burns everything in its path. There is a possibility to manage anger as a fire that can be guided by self-awareness and driven by self-improvement motives. This chapter is devoted to answering the question of how one can turn anger into something constructive. In its essence, anger is a message. It means that is something in our environment or within us that feels unfair. Rather than anger being pent up or being let out, we can step back and figure out why it is there in the first place. This approach is actually in concordance with the philosophy of life by Marcus Aurelius, who said, "You must fix your thoughts. When you know this and comprehend, you will be strong." From where the real strength is not in the impulse to anger, but in controlling the impulse and managing it when it happens. Where and how do we start to redirect anger into a positive manner? The first one is self-evaluation. When we experience anger, it's helpful to pause and ask, what do I need to hear? What does this anger want from me? When is it a response to invasion of some sort? And when is it a response to deprivation of an important need? It is the beginning of moving from being defensive to thinking about what the real issue is. For instance, if someone experiences the emotion of anger whenever he or she is insulted on the workplace, doing so will allow for a discussion about working relations rather than a rage. Turning anger into fuel also requires reframing. Psychologists highlight that while anger is a natural response, it can be constructive or destructive, depending on the mindset we adopt. This idea is reinforced by studies in cognitive behavioral therapy, which emphasize the power of reframing our thoughts. Instead of viewing a provocation as a trigger for immediate action, we can see it as a chance to advocate for ourselves in a balanced way, or to push for necessary changes in our lives. What does it mean to express anger constructively? It involves a shift from aggression to assertiveness. Aggression seeks to dominate or hurt. Assertiveness seeks to communicate needs and boundaries clearly and calmly. Think of anger as steam in a kettle. Left unchecked, it boils over. Channeled through the right vent, it powers engines. Assertive communication is that vent, allowing anger to propel rather than destroy. Philosophically, the Stoics believed in transforming anger by confronting it with rationality. Seneca noted that the wise person prepares for provocation by developing an understanding that external events do not dictate inner peace. This perspective can be applied today through mindful practices like journaling. Writing down what sparked our anger and how we handled it helps us learn and adapt for future situations. It's not just about handling a single instance of anger. It's about evolving in the way we approach all challenges. Lastly, resilience plays a vital role. Building emotional resilience doesn't mean becoming immune to anger, but rather being skilled at recovering from its effects. Activities that strengthen emotional regulation, such as meditation and controlled breathing, bolster our ability to pause before reacting. Research has shown that mindfulness practices decrease the intensity and duration of anger by re-engaging the rational parts of the brain. The simple act of taking a deep breath signals the body that it's safe to step back and assess. In the end, the transformation of anger is an ongoing practice. We won't get it perfect every time, but with each attempt, we gain mastery over our responses. We start to use anger as a guide, an inner compass pointing us toward what needs attention or change. The goal isn't to erase anger, but to let it inform, empower, and drive us toward growth without burning bridges or harming ourselves. Chapter 8. The Art of Letting Go. The last thing that needs to be done in order to manage anger is to know how to let go of the situation. Forgiving is not about denying our emotions, but liberating ourselves from these emotions. It becomes hard to let go because anger becomes a part of our thought process. It becomes a part of how we perceive the world, akin to being chained to something we regret. The choice is to remain angered and to continue this anger as a part of oneself at the price of diminishing one's chance of being at peace. We rehearse events in our heads, trying out possible ways of how things could have happened or ought to happen next, or reach for the possibility of vindication. However, in this, we create a prison for ourselves, which only nurtures bitterness and resentment. To quote the Buddha, of course, angry people are like a man who is holding a hot coal in one hand, intending to throw it at another. He is the one who gets burnt. Research done has also indicated that individuals who are weak in forgiveness or letting go of anger are most likely to experience these outcomes. It may be labeled as an emotional process, but releasing what is toxic for the mind and heart is a necessity for the body too. Simple things like gratitude and forgiveness works well. How can we learn to release anger? The practice starts with acceptance. Accepting is not agreeing that this has happened, but to agree that it has happened. This mindset puts us from a state of resistance, where anger is sustained, to a state of understanding where it is dissolved. Self-compassion is one of the helpful techniques that can be used in this case. If the anger comes, accept that it is quite normal to feel this way. That is normal. You are allowed to feel anger, betrayal, or disappointment, but be aware that grinding on these feelings only prolong the soreness. Forgiveness plays a crucial role here. Contrary to popular belief, forgiveness isn't for the benefit of the other person. It's for our own liberation. It allows us to break the chains of resentment and move forward. The Stoics believed in maintaining equanimity by focusing only on what we can control. Our reactions. As Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Forgiveness doesn't change the past. It changes our perspective, freeing us from its emotional grip. Techniques such as mindfulness, meditation, which encourages non-judgmental awareness, can help with the process of letting go. By observing our thoughts without attaching to them, we learn to witness anger as a passing cloud rather than a storm that defines us. The more we practice this, the easier it becomes to detach from those emotions when they arise, knowing that they are temporary and do not need to control us. Lastly, gratitude is a powerful antidote to anger. It shifts our focus from what we lack or what has been wrong to what we still have. Gratitude rewires the brain to seek out positive experiences and can interrupt the cycle of negative rumination. Simple practices, like journaling a few things we are grateful for each day, gradually cultivate a mindset where anger finds less fertile ground to take root. Letting go is an ongoing practice, not a one-time decision. It requires patience and conscious effort, but with time, the grip of anger weakens, and we find ourselves lighter, freer, and more at peace. The journey from anger to release is one of self-mastery, where the ultimate victory is not over others, but over the turmoil within. Lessons learned. Reflecting on our journey through understanding anger, it becomes clear that each step is a chance to learn and grow. Anger, when observed and managed properly, can become a teacher rather than a tormentor. This chapter pulls together the core insights gained from understanding the roots, triggers, and effective ways of handling this potent emotion. One of the essential lessons is that anger is often rooted in unmet expectations or perceived threats, whether to our ego, values, or personal boundaries. So it means it indeed a sign of weakness. Realizing this allows us to examine why certain events trigger strong reactions. Instead of immediately responding, we learn to pause and assess. What is this anger trying to tell me? Is it signaling a boundary I need to address or an expectation I need to reevaluate? Another key takeaway is that anger is not inherently bad. It's how we respond that makes the difference. Anger can motivate positive change if channeled constructively, such as when it pushes us to address injustices or speak up for what is right. However, it becomes destructive when expressed through impulsive words or actions that we later regret. Our exploration has also shown the importance of practicing emotional regulation. Techniques like mindfulness, deep breathing, and cognitive reframing help us build emotional resilience. The more we practice these techniques, the easier it becomes to respond to anger with clarity instead of impulsivity. Stoicism, with its focus on rational responses, teaches us that the only true control we have is over our reactions. Accepting this allows us to respond with composure, even in difficult situations. As we learn to let go of anger, we begin to recognize the freedom that comes with not being controlled by it. Letting go doesn't mean weakness. It means prioritizing peace over grudges. Chapter 10. A Path Forward. Summarizing the journey, anger can be seen as a double-edged sword. On one side, it is an emotional signal that alerts us to important issues. On the other, if mishandled, it becomes a source of harm to ourselves and others. The goal is not to eliminate anger, but to understand, manage, and use it wisely. Here are 3 practical tips for channeling anger constructively. 1. Practice the pause. When you feel anger, give yourself a moment. This pause could be as short as counting to 10 or taking 3 deep breaths. This momentary gap between trigger and reaction gives you the space to choose a response that aligns with your values. 2. Reframe the story. Challenge the narrative that fuels your anger. Instead of focusing on how you were wronged, ask yourself, what can I learn from this situation? How would I advise a friend in my place? This shift in perspective helps reduce the emotional charge and promotes rational thinking. 3. Engage in calming practices. Regular activities like mindfulness meditation, yoga, or progressive muscle relaxation help reduce the baseline level of anger over time. These activities train the mind to respond calmly to future provocations and help build resilience. The ultimate lesson is that mastering anger is not just about avoiding negative outcomes, but fostering a life rooted in inner peace and self-control. By learning from anger, understanding its messages, and practicing techniques to manage it, we unlock the potential for growth and greater emotional well-being. In the end, our relationship with anger defines whether it acts as a destructive force or a catalyst for change. When we learn to harness it mindfully, we find a deeper sense of freedom and the wisdom to navigate life with composure and empathy.